money can't buy happiness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard that saying.
Yeah.
But the story of Aaron Hernandez, man,
Yeah.
it kind of takes that to like a whole other level.
It really does.
I mean, this is a guy who seemingly had it all right. Fame, fortune, a promising career
Absolutely.
with the New England Patriots, and yet his life takes this really dark turn,
Yeah.
ending in tragedy and leaving behind just this mountain of unanswered questions.
It's a case that makes you think,
Yeah.
what's really going on behind the scenes. Because somebody can appear to be living the dream, but
Totally.
you never really know.
You don't know, and it's just so jarring, the difference between like the public persona
Right.
and then what was actually happening in his private life.
Absolutely.
You've brought us an episode of the Surlessly True Crime podcast, and it paints a
Yeah.
pretty disturbing picture of this whole case.
Does.
So we're going to take a deep dive into the life and the crimes of Aaron Hernandez, exploring kind of his troubled childhood, his rise to NFL stardom,
Yeah.
and then ultimately the shocking events that led to his downfall.
It's a fascinating story, but it's also incredibly tragic.
Yeah.
I think what makes it so compelling is that it touches on so many different things.
Yeah.
Violence, mental health, the pressures of fame,
For sure.
and of course, the lingering effects of childhood trauma.
Absolutely. So to understand this story, I think we need to start with the victim,
Okay.
Odin Lloyd. He was a semi-pro football player dating Shania Jenkins, whose sister
Right.
was engaged to Aaron Hernandez.
Yeah, it's a connection that proved to be, well, pretty fateful for Odin.
Yeah?
He was drawn into Aaron's world, this world of luxury and excitement
Oh, yeah.
that probably seemed very appealing to a young, aspiring athlete.
Right, of course.
Absolutely.
But that world also had a pretty dark underbelly.
It did.
The podcast mentions that Odin had actually observed Aaron using drugs,
Oh, wow.
and not just marijuana. PCP, which is a powerful hallucinogen that causes paranoia and aggression.
Yeah, and that detail, I think, becomes super significant when we look at, the events that happen later on.
Yeah.
Because PCP can have a really profound impact on behavior.
Oh, yeah.
It distorts perceptions, leads to unpredictable actions.
It's, chilling to think about.
It is.
Now, shifting our focus to Aaron's past, his childhood was really far from idyllic.
It sounds like it.
He grew up in a home marked by domestic violence,
Oh, wow.
and there were even allegations of sexual abuse.
Oh, gosh.
And to top it all off, his father dies suddenly when Aaron was just a teenager.
That's awful.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a recipe for trauma.
Absolutely.
And it's no surprise that he sought refuge in football.
Yeah.
It became his escape, his way of channeling his anger and his frustration.
Right.
And he excelled at it, quickly rising through the ranks.
He did.
Earning accolades like Gatorade's Football Player of the Year in high school. Yeah, he was clearly a gifted athlete. But even back then,
Yeah.
there were these warning signs, like the podcast mentions that he failed a drug test in college.
Really?
Yeah, and was allegedly involved in a drive-by shooting.
Oh, my gosh. So it seems like despite all this success
Yeah.
on the field, he's struggling off the field.
Totally.
Yeah.
And those demons would kind of continue to haunt him even after he achieved his dream
Wow.
of playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
His coach even warned him, saying something along the lines of,
Yeah.
one wrong move and you're out.
And sadly, those warnings went unheeded.
They did.
Yeah.
And Aaron's behavior just became more erratic,
Wow.
fueled by paranoia.
Yeah.
And a growing association with individuals like Ernest Wallace and Carlos Ortiz,
Right.
who the podcast says had a pretty negative influence on him.
It sounds like it.
He started carrying a gun everywhere he went, convinced that people were out to get him.
Oh, wow.
It's just this really dangerous combination.
Yeah.
You have this troubled young man, access to weapons, and this growing sense of invincibility.
Right.
And that leads us to the night of Odin Lloyd's murder.
Okay.
It starts with what seems like, typical night out, clubbing with friends.
Yeah.
But there are some unsettling details that kind of emerge from that night.
Okay.
The podcast highlights these text messages that Odin sent to his sister
Yeah.
just hours before he disappeared.
Wow.
And in these messages, he expresses this sense of unease.
Oh, gosh.
He even mentions that he's with NFL, as if he sensed something was off.
Oh, that sends chills down your spine.
It does, right?
Yeah.
It's like he must have known something was wrong.
Yeah.
The evidence suggests that sometime after those texts were sent, Aaron picks Odin up,
Right.
along with Wallace and Ortiz, in a rented Nissan Altima.
Okay.
And that car becomes a key piece of the puzzle.
Right. And there's security footage from that night showing them stopping at a gas station.
Okay.
And you see Aaron buying blue bubblegum. And then later on, investigators find that same gum stuck to a spent shell casing in the rental car.
Man, it's crazy how it's those little details
I know.
that really make a case so fascinating,
Right.
but also so disturbing.
Absolutely.
It's like piecing together this puzzle, but with these really high stakes.
Exactly. And it gets even more complicated when you start thinking about the motive.
Right.
Why would Aaron, with everything to lose, commit such a heinous act?
The podcast offers a couple of possible explanations.
Okay.
One theory is that Odin knew too much about Aaron's past, particularly this double homicide from 2012,
Right.
that the police were starting to reinvestigate,
Right.
with Aaron as the prime suspect.
Oh.
So could Odin have been silenced to protect Aaron?
It's definitely possible. Remember, I mean, Odin and Aaron weren't just casual acquaintances.
Right.
They were connected through their significant others. So
Yeah.
Odin might have known stuff
Yeah.
that could have implicated Aaron in that earlier crime.
Another theory, and this one is particularly sensitive,
Is that Odin may have known about Aaron's struggles with his sexuality.
Oh.
The podcast mentions a prison inmate who claims to have had a relationship with Aaron.
I think it's important to approach this aspect of the case with sensitivity
Oh, for sure.
and avoid, speculation.
Absolutely.
But what we can say is that Aaron's personal life was likely complex.
Right.
And there may have been things that he wanted to keep hidden.
Of course. Of course. And we're not here to, judge or make assumptions or anything like that.
Right.
But I think it's worth considering all possible angles when we're trying to figure out
Absolutely.
what happened.
Well, you can't consider everything.
And we can't overlook the role of drugs in all of this.
Right.
Aaron's PCP use, as we talked about, could have really impacted his behavior
Absolutely.
and his judgment.
It could have.
So are we saying that a drug-induced psychosis could have led him to commit murder?
It's possible. Yeah. PCP is known to, trigger extreme paranoia,
Right.
hallucinations, even violent outbursts.
Yeah.
So it's not a stretch to think that Aaron, under the influence, could have acted completely out of character.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
So let's move on to the investigation and the trial.
Okay.
The Surlessly podcast mentions that the police zeroed in on Aaron pretty quickly.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah.
I mean, they found a ton of evidence linking him to the crime, text messages, security footage,
Right.
even a chewed piece of that blue gum
Oh, wow.
found at the crime scene.
It all matches.
Matches the gum he bought at the gas station.
It's like a smoking gun, literally.
Yeah, it really is.
What about his accomplices, Wallace and Ortiz? Did they cooperate?
They were both arrested,
Okay.
charged in connection with the murder,
Uh-huh.
but their stories about what happened that night, they were inconsistent and often contradicted each other.
So it sounds like the prosecution's case was pretty strong.
It was. They presented a very compelling narrative, backed up by forensic evidence, witness testimony. Even Aaron's fiancée, Shaina Jenkins, was called to testify.
Oh, wow.
And her testimony revealed that there may have been attempts to cover up the crime,
Wait, she was involved?
according to the podcast, yeah.
That's a crazy twist.
Cheyenne admitted to getting rid of a trash bag from their home at Aaron's request,
Uh-huh.
and investigators think that bag might have had the murder weapon in it.
Wow, it's hard to believe that someone so close to him
I know.
would be implicated in something so serious.
It's shocking.
So what was the outcome?
Well, after weeks of testimony and deliberations, the jury found Aaron Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow.
He was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
So the NFL star, once celebrated for all his talent and potential, was now a convicted murderer.
Yeah, facing a life behind bars.
It really makes you think,
It does.
that no one is above the law,
Absolutely.
regardless of their fame or fortune.
It doesn't matter who you are.
But the story doesn't end there.
Yeah, it doesn't, no.
We still have the double homicide from 2012.
That's right.
So while serving his sentence for Odin Lloyd's murder,
Yeah.
he's put on trial for those earlier killings.
He is.
And in a really surprising turn of events,
Yeah.
he's acquitted.
He is.
Acquitted? How is that even possible?
The details of that trial, they're complicated,
Okay.
but it seems like the prosecution just had a weaker case.
Okay.
They didn't have the same level of forensic evidence or witness testimony that they had in the Odin Lloyd case.
So after all that, he's cleared of those charges.
He is, yeah, but his freedom is short-lived.
What do you mean?
Just 2 days after he's acquitted,
Oh, gosh.
he's found dead in his prison cell. He hanged himself.
Oh, my gosh. It's almost unbelievable. Like, just when you think the story couldn't get more complicated, there's another twist.
Yeah.
Why would he take his own life just days after being cleared of those other charges?
Yeah.
It's a question that's haunted, like, investigators.
Right.
People who followed this case closely.
Right.
Was it guilt? Was it despair? Or was there something more?
It's hard to know for sure what would drive somebody to take such a drastic step, especially after seemingly gaining a second chance.
Yeah.
The podcast explores a couple of possibilities.
Okay.
And one that really jumps out is the potential financial motive.
Okay.
Some people think that Aaron might have calculated this
Oh, well.
to ensure that his fiancée and his daughter would get money
Okay.
from his NFL contract.
Okay.
Because remember, his conviction for Odin Lloyd's murder was initially overturned
Right.
because of a legal technicality,
Right.
which meant his estate could potentially benefited financially.
Yeah.
But then, of course, that conviction was later reinstated.
Okay.
So it adds another layer of complexity to that theory.
Right. It's like, it's a chilling thought
It is.
that even in death, there was this, like, calculated element.
Yeah.
But then we also have this CTE factor,
Right.
which adds this whole other dimension to the story.
It does.
Yeah. So after his death, it was revealed that Aaron had severe CTE,
Right.
chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
Yeah.
which is a degenerative brain disease
Yeah.
that's linked to repeated head trauma.
Right. Often seen in athletes.
Right, exactly.
Who play contact sports.
So this obviously raises serious questions
Absolutely.
about, the connection between his behavior and his death.
For sure.
So for those who maybe aren't familiar with CTE,
Yeah.
can you explain a little bit more about like what it is?
Sure. CTE is a progressive disease
Okay.
that affects the brain, and it's caused by repeated blows to the head.
Okay.
Over time, that trauma can lead to a buildup of this abnormal protein called tau,
Right.
and that disrupts the normal function of brain cells.
Got it.
And that disruption can show up in a lot of ways.
Right.
Mood swings, impulsivity, aggression,
Right.
memory problems, even dementia in the later stages.
So in Aaron's case, is it possible that those repeated hits he took on the field could have contributed to like his behavior, his paranoia,
It's possible.
even his violent actions?
Yeah, while we can't definitively say that CTE caused his actions,
Right.
it's definitely a factor that we can't ignore.
Right.
I mean, studies have shown this strong link
Yeah.
between CTE and increased aggression,
Right.
impulsivity, difficulty controlling emotions.
Yeah.
So it's plausible that the damage that was done to his brain,
Right.
on top of his troubled childhood
Right.
and other personal struggles, kind of created this like perfect storm that led to these tragic events.
It's a reminder of the potential consequences of contact sports,
For sure.
particularly football,
Yeah.
where like repeated head impacts are just inevitable.
Yeah. Aaron's story is a wake-up call, I think, for
Yeah.
athletes, coaches, parents,
Right.
about, how important it is to protect young athletes from head injuries
Yeah.
and to know the signs and the symptoms of CTE.
Right.
Early detection and intervention are key in managing this devastating disease.
And I think it's not even just about sports,
Right.
Aaron's story really just highlights this broader need
Yeah.
for awareness and understanding of mental health issues.
Absolutely.
He was clearly struggling for a really long time.
It seemed like it.
And you wonder if he had received the right help,
Yeah.
if things might have been different.
It's definitely possible. I
Yeah.
think we need to create an environment where people
Yeah.
feel comfortable seeking help
Yeah,
without the stigma,
Totally.
without shame.
absolutely.
Early intervention and access to good mental health care
For sure.
are essential in preventing things like this from happening.
Now, before we wrap up, there's one final twist we need to talk about
Okay.
that emerged from the Sir Lisley podcast.
Yeah.
It involves the inmate, Kyle Kennedy, who claims to have had that relationship with Aaron.
Right. This is where the story takes an even darker turn.
Yeah.
Kennedy says that Aaron confessed to a fourth murder, a crime that's still unsolved.
A fourth murder. On top of everything else.
It's almost too much to even think about.
It is.
The details of the confession, they're murky,
Yeah.
and there's no real evidence to support it.
Okay.
But it adds another layer of mystery to this whole thing and raises questions about how much Aaron was actually involved in all of this.
It's possible there are more victims out there,
It's possible.
whose stories haven't been told.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
Yeah.
So even in death, Aaron Hernandez continues to leave us with more questions than answers.
Yeah, it's a story that's really captivated people.
It has.
But it's also a story that makes us confront some really uncomfortable truths
Right.
about violence, mental health, and the dark side of fame.
So what stands out to you as like the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think for me, it's just the reminder that we really need to look beyond the surface
Yeah.
to recognize that everybody has a story
Yeah.
and that even the most troubled individuals
Yeah.
deserve compassion and understanding.
Absolutely.
And it highlights how important it is to address mental health issues early on
Yes.
before they turn into tragedy.
It's a really powerful message and one I hope resonates with our listeners.
Me too.
Aaron Hernandez's story may be over,
Yeah,
but the conversations that it sparks, those should continue.
absolutely.
We need to talk about CTE, about mental health, the pressures that these young athletes face,
Right,
and how we can create a more supportive world.
for sure.
So if you found this deep dive into the life of Aaron Hernandez thought-provoking,
Yeah,
make sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive
absolutely.
for more explorations of compelling topics.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning,
Yeah,
and keep those minds engaged.
absolutely.